Hello. I'm going to look at something wonderful I've bought. When I initially show it to you, you're probably not going to think that, but it is. So by way of explanation, we have to quickly, it's not this spoon, I'm talking about silver. Not any particular object, the material, silver. Where does it come from? Don't say the bullion dealer, because that's a very obvious answer and a flippant one. We mine it. We've always mined silver. Humanity, that is, not you and me. Humanity has always mined silver. We've always pursued the precious metal, and we've chased all over the globe for it. In the ancient world, it came from Greece and Turkey. There's the Laurian mines, which are the fabled Greek mines that produce millions of ounces of silver, just 60 miles outside Athens. So when you look at a piece of classical silver, if you're ever lucky enough in a museum or even to handle a piece, and all the silver coinage that you get, the Greek silver coins, it all came from those mines. In the Roman period, because of course there are lots of Roman silver coins about, if you think about it, in collections and people are digging them up, a lot of that silver came from Germany and from Spain. But again, as mining is a process of extracting silver out of the ground, the more you dig out, the less you have. So all these mines, all these sources have a lifespan. But happily, as we look back through history, just as one is playing out, it's discovered somewhere else, and that continues the growth of silver, thank goodness, otherwise we wouldn't have wonderful pieces of antique silver to look at. In the late 15th, early 16th century, when European sources of silver are playing out and it's becoming terribly scarce again, the Spanish had the presence of mind to go and discover South America, much to the chagrin of the South Americans who were there, it must be said. And they pillaged like Billio, and they found the richest source, it must be said, of silver in the world, in Mexico, Peru and Bolivia, the Potosi mines in Bolivia, the Mountain of Silver, as it was often known. And for the next 300 years, almost, 85% of the world's silver came from those three countries, from the export of South American silver. So if you are holding a lovely bit of 17th or 18th century English hallmark silver or French silver or Danish silver, the chances are the silver in those objects all came from South America, which is quite remarkable in a way when you think about it. But this is, the driving of trade, the trading of silver. And even as those mines started to become less productive after, a 300-year period of digging the buggery out of them, then happily the United States of America comes to everybody's rescue. And in the push west, the frontier, not only did they famously discover lots of gold, they also discovered lots of silver in Colorado, Utah and Nevada. Particularly famous is the Comstock lode, where, basically more silver than you could ever think of. It's all exported, it's all traded. Where, you ask, though, if you are a good British citizen, where are we in this equation? There's been no mention of Britain, Michael. No, well, we weren't particularly rich in silver, unfortunately. If you go back maybe to the Roman period, the Romans were mining silver in Wales. And also Wales is quite known for Welsh gold. There are small amounts of Welsh gold knocking about the place. You'll know that all the royal wedding rings are made of Welsh gold. God bless you, ma'am, sir, your highness, whoever you are. So keeping it in the family. But from the Elizabethan period onwards, which is really the period we're considering in terms of collecting silver, there ain't much English silver. And what there is treated quite specially. At the end of the Elizabethan period, possibly the most famous spoon, if you don't know this, go and Google it after you watch this talk, is the Gilbert spoon. The Gilbert spoon was made in Exeter by John Eads for a member of the Gilbert family sometime in the 1580s. And the Gilbert family, as well as doing lots of things with Walter Raleigh and being very famous, owned a mine. They owned a silver mine in Cornwall, the Combe Martin mine, which is probably the most famous mine. And it provided reasonable amounts of silver in the 16th century, but then it sort of played out. And it is believed that the Gilbert spoon, which is remarkable for any number of reasons, we know its provenance, we know who it was made for. The finial is the crest of the Gilbert family, which is a squirrel. It is the only spoon known produced with the squirrel crest of the Elizabethan period. Utterly fabulous thing. Heavy as lead. And made, it is believed, with silver from the Combe Martin mine. So that is an entirely and purely English piece of silver, made from English silver, which is a remarkable thing. And we'll come back to Combe Martin in a minute. From that period onwards, as I say, all our silver, nearly all our silver, comes in through trade. And it mainly comes in from Spanish silver that's excavated out of South America and the New World. So that's where our silver is coming from. In the 17th century, there aren't really any silver mines anymore in England. There are small pockets of silver does occur in copper and lead mines, which are still commercially being run. Now, the two areas where you can get this happening rarely is either in Cumberland and Northumberland in the north of the country, or in the far west in Cornwall. So up in the north, it's lead mining. And I'm sad to say that I did once have an early 18th century Newcastle beaker engraved with a dedication inscription to a lead mine. And since then, I've seen two others. And I do believe that they were specifically made with silver that was excavated or extracted from a lead mine. It wasn't a regular thing. They would come across a pocket that was particularly rich in silver. It would not be enough to be commercially mined. But obviously, if you're a mine owner, you're very wealthy anyway, you would extract the silver and you would have, this is what happens, you would have commemorative objects made for you personally, or for other mine owners, or for presentations. And you would, and this is the key feature, you would dedicate or inscribe them, describing how that silver had been extracted. And that tells you two things. It tells you it was valued at the time, but it also tells you it was a rare occurrence. If this stuff was turning up in any sort of reasonable quantity, it would simply be commercially mined and sold. But it was a rare thing for it to turn up, and it was rare enough that when it did, it was commemorated by having that silver worked into commemorative objects. So that's how rare it is. That's what you've got to remember. So in the 18th century, you do get a handful of these Newcastle beakers. There may be more lurking somewhere with the lead mine inscription. I've also seen and underbid many years ago, foolishly, a cake basket of all things. And on the reverse of that cake basket, which is early 19th century, George IV, is an inscription saying that the silver it is made of was extracted from a Cumbrian lead mine. And what's telling as well is that is the higher Britannia standard. And it's very unusual to get Britannia standard pieces out of period. So that was another wonderful thing. You also get, or I have seen, early 19th century snuff boxes made from Cornish silver. Now, for all that period, it's all commemoratives. In about the 1840s, the Combe Martin mine, if you cast your mind back, the Gilbert Spoon Combe Martin mine, is producing, or is reopened, and new techniques allow more silver to be extracted. And Henry Ellis, who's next to Goldsmith, He has the marvellous idea of making all manner of small touristy gifts, shawl pins and brooches from Combe Martin silver. They're made in Birmingham. He doesn't make them. They're made in Birmingham for him. They're then often assayed in Exeter, and they are stamped on the back of the piece, Combe Martin, to denote where the silver had come from. There's a part of me that wonders if the silver going from Exeter to be refined in Birmingham, made into jewellery, was kept clinically separate, or whether, just knowing what Birmingham silversmiths were like, they just made the stuff out of any old stuff. It would be interesting if you've got Combe Martin silver, marked Combe Martin silver, which does rarely turn up, to go and have it analysed and see if the people that were making the jewellery in Birmingham were being scrupulously honest or not. It's debatable, I'm afraid. But it's still rare. It's still rare to get a piece of marked Combe Martin silver. But aside from that, that's it. That's it for British silver. The stuff that was mined by the Romans has gone and melted and mixed in with hundreds and thousands of other objects. The currency, the silver that was mined for currency prior to the Elizabethan period, that's in some coinage. You can't tell which coinage it's in or which it isn't. And that's it. And then there are that handful of engraved and dedicated pieces, the Newcastle beakers, the Cumbrian basket, the Cornish mine snuff boxes, where you've got lengthy dedication inscriptions. But that's all there is for British silver in the world. And then last week at auction, I saw this. This is not a piece of excrement. Just before, dirty old, is it a hedgehog? It looks slightly a hedgehog with lesions. I'll do a slight close-up of this. This is a blob of metal. You're going, you know, I've waited 12 and a half minutes and listened to you ramble on across the globe to show me this dirty bit of old metal. Well, this dirty bit of old metal was in a catalogue, and at first I went straight past it. I didn't pay it any attention. And then I noticed it came with this. And this is a little handwritten, incredibly fragile note, which I've put in this plastic sleeve so it doesn't disintegrate. And I'm going to read it to you now, if I can remember what it says. The first produce from Mr. Treffry's smelting house at par, by which the silver is separated from copper raised at Foy Consul Mine, Mr. Treffry, June 1840. Joseph Thomas Austin, later changed his name to Joseph Treffry, was a very famous Victorian, early Georgian Victorian civil engineer in Cornwall. And he built the harbours at Par and Newquay. He built railways, but his principal source of income and the principal driver for everything he did was the fact that he was a mine owner. He owned Foy Consul Mine, shares in Foy Consul Mine, until he actually owned a controlling share in them, which were the old Wheel, if you think back to Poldark, Wheel Treasure, Wheel Fortune and Wheel Chance, the old Cornish copper mines. And he extracted vast quantities of copper from them. It made him a very wealthy man, and he expanded to have his own smelting house built at Par after he'd built the harbour. It's right on the front. I'll try and get a black and white image of it if I can, and use that as the cover image for this video. And in 1840, he unsuccessfully tried to devise new ways for the smelting and purification of copper in the smelting house. They were commercially unsuccessful, But according to this note, and according to this, he also tried to extract the small amount of silver that was present in the copper. And this was the first silver which was extracted in this process. This is remarkable because these things are normally melted, as I say, and made into commemorative objects. And it is possible because Treffry was a civil engineer and much more mechanically and scientifically minded, that he wanted to keep the first example of this Cornish silver extracted under, I believe, a chemical process. I'm not entirely sure. There is certainly the ghost of an impression of a metal rod or a receiver that has obviously collected and drawn the silver to it. And when we look at the surface of this, which we will in detail, you can see it has a slightly crystalline structure to it. I am not a chemist, I am not a metallurgist, but somebody out there will probably know the process. I think chemical process, I think it's 1840 is just slightly too early for it to be an electrochemical process. Maybe I'm wrong. To extract the silver from the copper. It wasn't commercially viable. In 1840, at the end of 1840, the whole smelting works went to the refinement of lead from his other mines, and had very little to do with copper anymore, and certainly nothing to do with silver. So how rare is this? This is, hand on heart, pure Cornish silver. More remarkable that once extracted, it has not been touched in nearly 200 years. It is the lump of silver as it was extracted in the smelting house in June 1840 at Par. So it's not an object, it's not hallmarked, it's not worked, but it is remarkably rare. And there are just not specimens of British silver, of, don't want to offend any Cornishmen, of Cornish silver. This is pure Cornish silver, extracted nearly 200 years ago, and it is remarkable. And the fact that it occurred at auction, turned up at auction for, with an estimate less than scrap, is one of life's mysteries. And that nobody else apparently bothered about it too much either. I will tell you that if you saw it and forgot to leave a bid, you weren't going to buy it. I left an absolute fortune on it, and was going to buy it come what may, because opportunities like this never come again. This is once in a lifetime business. Once you understand how phenomenally rare any silver that you can confidently ascribe to being British silver is in the world. There's the Gilbert spoon, there's some Northumbrian lead mine beakers, there's a cake basket, there's a snuff box. You're talking about a few ounces, tens of ounces of silver in the world. This, I should say, weighs 5.5 ounces. And it will not be touched, it will not be melted, it is rare as it is. And the crystalline structure and the fact that as a specimen it has never been polished or cleaned in over 200 years has meant that the surface has gone this very wonderful gold, multicoloured colour. You know, there are silversmiths that try to turn their silver this colour with various chemical processes, but this has taken 200 years, and its crystalline structure. So I'm going to do a close-up of that, and I've gone on for a long time, but I'm so excited by this, I can't tell you. If you don't get it, I understand. If you're looking at it as a dirty, ugly lump, I understand. But if you have an appreciation of silver, the processes, the mining and where it comes from, you'll never get better than this. So I'll do the close-ups just so you can see the surface of it, which is amazing. And next week, nothing as interesting as this. Probably nothing as interesting as this ever again, but there you go. Until next week, goodbye and good antiques hunting.